Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I want to, first of all, respond,
for Caroni Central, and it's after lunch. I'm reminding everybody of Standing Order 53. Those who want to make interruptions can rely on the relevant standing order. Member for Caroni Central.
Thank you, ma'am. I'll engage some of the issues that the member raised in a congenial way, really, as I stand to make a few points. I don't think I will take my full time on this act to combat corruption and other wrongdoings by encouraging and facilitating disclosures of improper conduct in the public and private sector, to protect persons making these disclosures from detrimental action, to regulate the receiving, investigating, or otherwise dealing with disclosures of improper conduct, and to provide for the other matters connected with. The member raised Moruga Tableland, the issue of citizens' engagement, Madam Speaker. And I think perhaps the biggest issue of citizens' disengagement with the governance process is the dissonance that the citizen feels between what politicians and those in leadership positions say and what they do. And I think we should reflect on that for a moment. It is very real, that dissonance between talk and walk. The member said that it is possible to change a culture, and I do believe with him. I believe what he said to be true. It is possible to change a culture. And I do agree with him also that you can have laws or rules that help to change a culture, just like you can have the introduction of technology that helps to transform or change a culture. I do believe that that is true. But in order to do that, the dissonance between talk and walk must also be arrested. It helps. So the laws support at one level, the technology supports at another level, and the example becomes critical in this process. He said something else that I thought was important. He talked about the culture of corruption and the rising tide of criminality, and that they were connected. I also believe that that is true. Because there is a direct connection, and sometimes many indirect connections, between white-collar crime and the crime on the ground. He mentioned I'm not sure if he said the sweep of legislation. I thought you said that. Huh? Suite. The suite of legislation. And I did have this. I've been looking at this for like 3 or 4 months now, the legislation that was promised, the legislation we brought to Parliament. And there are 2 things that I find about the legislation to be extremely strong. It is not limited to this, because there might be aberrations. But in general, I find, one, a lot of the legislation is prompted by international demands that require legislative action at home. And the second thing is that a lot of the legislation increases governmental power in the country. And I think if you look at those 2 elements, I mean, you really question the whole motivation behind the local governance process. Not that responding to international promptings is not necessary. I am not so sure that the increasing power of government is justified. But I want to record that when you look at the suite of legislations or maybe this word sweep is a good word. In fact, you find these dominant traits in the legislation. Now, when the Honorable Prime Minister spoke, and he spoke well, he's a good speaker, both on the platform and in the Parliament. And he is always a clear speaker in his methodology and his message, you know. But he talked about an act of urgency, the legislation not being an act of urgency to deal with any specific matter. And he said it was a campaign commitment to bring the whistleblower legislation. And it took them 4 years, but they brought it. He said that they had put it forward before in 2016. It had gone through the Joint Select Committee process. I do agree with my colleague from Oropouche East that the Attorney General, as chair, should have proceeded to complete that process and let it come here with the reports. But having said that, you know, there are many, many other promises that they might have brought also, not just to the Parliament, but to the country. There was one point that he made, though, and I think the Attorney General made a similar point in his presentation, which is that because the private sector is so connected to public money, because of the largeness of government and the extent to which they are connected or dependent on public expenditure, government expenditure, that it was necessary to bring one piece of legislation that legislated for both the public and the private sector. And this is where I begin to have a problem. While I take the issue of public money, while I take the issue of the connection between public and private sector in its exposure and engagement of public money, if that becomes a rationale for basically strengthening the power of government over not just the process involving the public sector, but the process involving the private sector, it can turn out to be a problematic issue in a society such as this that is so connected. The Honorable Prime Minister also said that we must not be afraid to do our duty and that we have nothing to fear. And I want to say, Madam Speaker, we have always, as an opposition, done our duty in this Parliament. Sometimes the government likes it, sometimes they do not like it, but always we do what we feel is right for the legislation and for the moment.